Hey guys, welcome back. You guys have been liking the alternate history stuff recently, so I got another one for us to check out. It's called 10 alternate scenarios that are actually dumb. All right, I'm excited to see what this list consists of. And since we're watching this together, make sure you let me know what you think down below. All right, original video is going to be down below. Let's get started. All right, thoughts going in are these like popular alternate scenarios that we've heard in other, I don't know, videos or just seen hypothesized before? Not going to go after their own previous alternate scenarios, are they? Oh well, let's see.
When it comes to alternate history scenarios, the main goal is to always think about a timeline that's kinda fun and different. But how one gets to that timeline is on a spectrum, one that ranges from incredibly realistic, where one extremely rare event in our timeline is slightly altered in a reasonable way, to stuff like,
Columbus
what if
fade.
Germany won World War II by nuking DC? Recently, I've tried to step my game up and make videos about scenarios which
Man in the High Tower,
realistic, and allow us to learn about our own timeline. But today's
I've
video,
liked that so far with just, I mean, with this whole series that he does, is it's not like crazy alternate stuff. It's like, you know, one little thing, but and for the most part, I've thought that most things are pretty plausible that they've done.
is all about the wall of shame. Scenarios, or point of divergences, that make no sense and fall apart under the littlest bit of scrutiny. To help me on my mission, I made a special challenge on my Discord community. And the following scenarios by the 10 winners greatly helped me in the making of this list. So, let's do this.
Join our Discord, by the way.
Talking
Link down
about
below.
some unrealistic scenarios. You know what's more realistic than you might think? Looking back into the past. Your own past. Your own heritage. Actually, not your heritage. My heritage. The sponsor of today's video. I love history, but there's nothing quite like researching the history of yourself. Is that narcissistic to say? I don't know. And my heritage gives you the tools to easily
I think like doing genealogy
stones
work
that
is
haven't
super
been turned
fascinating.
in generations. Gives you a great sense of perspective.
Found out I have
how you
ancestors
got
from
here.
the Salem
All it
witch
takes is
trials.
just building a tree.
Think we were
Start with
burning
yourself,
folks.
your relatives,
The Terrys.
and then watch as it begins to grow. With instant discoveries, my heritage can add entire lines that you didn't even know existed. Whole new paths to uncover. Like for me, I didn't know my 6th great-grandfather was a blacksmith. And a cabinet maker, and a gunsmith. Apparently he made a lot of guns. And he did this—
By the way, that is why the last name Smith is so common in the English language. Because oftentimes you get named, when I started doing like last names, family name took on like the family, task, the family, occupation. So like a blacksmith, right? Silversmith, that kind of thing. That's why Smith is so common. I learned that.
near the same area where I grew up. If I really had anything more interesting to share, I'd tell you, hey, at least their photo enhancing software is top notch. Enhance old pictures or even animate them to bring old memories to life. Explore my heritage's 19+ billion historical documents to find records of your family members.
How do you even get that?
So why not join the #1 family history service? Sign up for a 14-day free trial by clicking the link in the description below to enjoy all the amazing features my heritage.
Shout out to Genie Vlogger.
All right,
wait.
what's my heritage has to offer?
That went quick. What's this first one? Okay, stinker number 1. Alexander invades Rome. Yeah, he's known for going east, but why not west?
All right, let's start big.
During the Roman
with one of the
Republic,
most
before the
common and
Empire.
fundamentally flawed scenarios. What if Alexander invaded Rome? Well, for starters, everyone who wants to increase Alexander's lifespan kinda forgot that he wore one of history's thickest plot armors. There were numerous occasions where he just miraculously survived. But even if he was
out in the front
able to
lines.
continue his hot streak, we quickly stumble upon the second problem here. Alexander already had plans for his next expedition. An expedition that was aimed at Arabia, followed up by a trip to Carthage. If the man himself didn't consider Rome as a potential threat or even prize, why would the rest of us? Oh yeah, that's right. We want to see the epic clash of legionnaires versus silver shields. Apart from being centuries off, the biggest problem was how overextended the Macedonian
they overlap a little
Empire
bit.
already was. I would bet that out of 100 timelines, we live in the one where Alexander got to live the longest. No point of divergence.
Did they do a video on like what if Alexander hadn't died young? I swear I covered something like that before. And this was one of the things that was talked about is like what were going to be those next plans. Cause he goes back to Babylon over after basically failing to take over India. But what was going to be the next moves? And I've heard just a lot of hypotheses about that. Again, potentially going west, maybe going back east one more time.
Could prevent his empire. Alexander got to live the longest. No point of divergence could prevent his empire from collapsing, and no foe could present an
the Romans
epic
were so
opponent
Greekified
worthy
anyways.
of topping what he had already accomplished.
Okay, Rome industrializes. Oh, I covered a video from this as well. Industrialization of Rome, and essentially the thesis was, yeah, industrial revolution happens in the year 0 or something, and then it could go off crazy. And there were a lot of things that they had developed that were on the brink of what we consider industrialization. They were already playing around with the ideas of steam engines, never really made any kind of practical use, but at least experimenting kind of like how you could kind of make one. And that was really cool. But yeah, all right. So back to that, other one there. I mean, the Roman Republic and Rome was so Greekified anyways. I wonder if really anything would have even happened. Because it's like if he goes over there, conquers or gets them to unify or something, you think it really like changes things? I mean, maybe he puts one of his buddies and, rules over them like he did with Ptolemy in Egypt. But like, you wonder if it would be really all that drastic. I don't know. What do you guys think? Okay, number 2, Rome industrializes.
Human progress is not.
This is not a
line,
dumb alternate
and the fall of
scenario.
the Romans is the best example for that. It took humanity over a millennia to recover the level of logistics, army sizes, infrastructure capabilities, life expectancy, medicinal knowledge, and so much more. But what if Rome had gone one step further? What if Rome adopted steam power?
Now, here would be one of the... Okay, so he's going to put... This is from Galen, I believe he was, a scientist who made this thing. They'll show, essentially, it spins because of steam power. But one thing that would have kept Rome from doing this too, and actually kept other places, say like China, from going into an industrial revolution like the British did, was like China and ancient Rome. One thing they did not lack was labor. Okay, in Rome, they had an extensive use of slavery. It's like a third of the people there are basically slaves. So the cheapest labor basically possible. And then China had just had a crazy abundance of labor during the Qing dynasty as well, that labor was cheap. A place like Britain had motivation to be able to keep up with those type of economies like a China or India. Was basically you needed, because their population was so much lower, that you needed a way of having labor saving devices. And that's one of the reasons why England does this.
All Heron steam engine was well known to the Romans.
Yeah, Heron, not
even if
Galen.
it was just a party trick. Surely all it takes is a good POD to propel Romans to the industrial age, right? Not really. Industrialism is not a spontaneous event that occurs in a vacuum.
Sure.
It has a list of like 15 prerequisites, of which Rome met about 4. Food surplus, domesticated drought animals, the concept of math, and most importantly, the belief that the natural and supernatural are separate.
Well, there's other things to that too. We talk about this. We actually have a debate in my class about when we get to industrialization, and it's what are the most important factors for industrialization, and the kids debate it. But anyway, other ones that would go here would be, and they hit some, but these ones are all pretty good, but also natural resources. Rome has plenty. You need, place for population outlet, which is actually a little bit more about imperialism. But a growing population to be able to do this. You need a government structure that also supports it as well, and probably needs to let entrepreneurs basically develop it that way. I mean, you could still do it with government oversight of such an industrialization, but that is another thing that you need. Access to like waterways and transportation. Rome definitely would have had that, an extensive system of roads. They actually had most everything other than a lack of labor, which is maybe one of the biggest reasons.
So good. But going down the list, there are some crucial steps that the Romans never came close to achieving.
Okay, what is
Ancient
it?
Rome failed to find the connection between physics, math, and engineering. They also had no sophisticated economic theory. This is a big one. And any society that dabbles in slavery.
I mean, okay, so the Industrial Revolution was kind of built up, or not built upon, but it piggybacked along with new economic theory, especially laissez-faire economics, which I don't know is necessarily like required to industrialize that way. I mean, you could still have, I guess, state-sponsored industrialization, but you just got to give them a motivation, I guess, to do it.
Is kind of cursed with stagnation. Without a relatively strong middle class and class mobility, industrialization is little more than a distant dream. When we add to that the lack of machine tools, calculus, capitalism, and the scientific method, the amount of divergences we need to make for this scenario to work in the first place becomes unbearable.
I think people are
There's
underrating
a
their
bigger chance
science,
of the Nazis developing a nuke than Rome ever utilizing the steam engine.
Wait, what?
Nazis developing a nuke than Rome ever utilizing terrible. There was a bigger chance of the Nazis developing a nuke than Rome ever utilizing the steam engine.
I don't think that's really much of a take, though.
Keep in mind that
Germans weren't
while this
that
goes
far.
for Rome, this can also apply to ancient Greece, China, Persia, and Byzantium.
Yeah, okay, it depends on all of those, but Greece does not have the resources for it. They also don't have economic unity that way. They would have, I mean, if they wanted to compete with the economies of like Egypt, that could have been, you know, something to drive some motivation. They also basically were able to trade with anything. China, again, it really just came down to a couple things: lack of government support for it, and also, I don't know if you'd put Confucianism in there as well, a little bit of kind of downplaying the idea of like merchants, because Confucianism really highlights, you know, basically intellectuals and peasant farmers, and not so much the kind of economic class. But yeah, government that didn't necessarily support it, maybe some cultural things, but they were technologically advanced. For much of Chinese history, China was the most technologically advanced place on the planet. It just didn't necessarily all come down to things that are going to pave the way for industrialization. But the biggest thing still with someone like China or any of the Indian dynasties would be no need to have faster labor or faster production. The labor is already dirt cheap.
So, sorry,
because of
Jimmy,
massive
no
population.
steampunk wars for you.
Anyway, Harold Hardrada conquers England. All right.
This scenario gets a lot of attention.
I mean, the
and for good
Vikings already
reason.
conquered
It's
them, though.
fascinating. It seems
Eventually.
plausible. And a few slight tweaks could change the course of Britain forever. In our timeline, 1066 marks the end of the Viking Age, largely because Norwegian King Harold Hardrada was defeated and killed
Okay.
at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Instead
Right.
of being conquered from the north, England succumbed to the
Just
Norman
more
invasion
Viking
from
times?
the south, led by William the Conqueror. But what if Hardrada's fierce berserkers weren't caught off guard by
Do you guys, though, like, buy into the thing? It's like ending of the Viking Age, but like the Normans were like Viking descendants. Is it really that big of a difference?
Anglo-Saxon king? Following his victory against Godwinson, he would march down to London and repel the Normans. Yeah, sadly, this latter part is what earns the scenario apart in the video. For the legendary Hardrada, also known as the Bulgar Burner, to be victorious, he needed to deal with William as fast as possible. But this meant that the Norwegian army, which just crossed the North Sea and defeated the Anglo-Saxons, now had to rush all the way down south. More than likely, he would take his time to rest his soldiers and take control of some crucial settlements and castles. The battles of Stamford and Hastings are just 3 weeks apart.
Right.
And Godwinson was able to pull that off only because it was his territory to defend and freely traverse. But let's make a massive leap of faith and say that a wounded and exhausting Viking force, which somehow gets accepted by the locals, meets the conqueror. The thing is, the
Britons?
Normans were just as good on the field, and William was a much better strategist. Hardrada was a decent tactician, sure, but he's more well known for his legendary bravery and skill in combat than being a strategic leader. Then we have the cavalry, or at least the Normans did. The X factor in medieval warfare.
What I'm also trying to think of as you tell about this is what is really the alternate scenario? What is the biggest outcome, okay, if the Normans fail how big of an alternate scenario is this? Because again, when you think about some of these other ones I already had, like Rome industrializing, like major global changes in timelines.
Tanks that dominated the meta until the advent of gunpowder. No amount of Viking war paint
100 Years'
fury
War
could stop the charge of the heavy knights. And ultimately, even if Hadrada did meet William in battle, history probably would have played out similarly to our timeline.
All right, so yeah, I don't think major there. I'm not as interested in this one. Okay, Ming sailed to America. I love this one. This is one I bring up every year to my class. Early Ming Dynasty was into foreign exploration. Zheng He, probably heard of him. If you haven't, he's the greatest explorer that you've never heard of. Anyways, are almost a century ahead of the Europeans when it comes to ocean-faring travel. So if China had done this, and there's some fringe hypotheses out there about maybe the China like got to see some of the coast, but it's super fringe. But nevertheless, if they had a policy of colonization, but that was another thing too, is with China in the Ming Dynasty and under Zheng He, they weren't about colonizing. Remember, the Ming came into power as the group that kicked out the Mongols, and they did not want to really deal with like foreigners in that way anymore. The Mongol rule, which was about 100 years, left such a bad taste in their mouth that even these expeditions don't last very long. And they were mostly just about declaring the new Ming dynasty. They would go around all around the Indian Ocean basin, from Africa, India, and all that, basically try to get tribute, try to basically just declare themselves on the scene. And that was about it. They were, never into colonization. But if they were into colonization, think again about a China. What if China starts actually trying to become imperial that way, in the sense of maybe they invade into India and try to colonize, or Africa, or like we're seeing here, the Americas. That is a drastically different timeline. So I love this one.
The Heavenly Kingdom of California. Los Angeles? More like Laos Anji. That was terrible. Yeah, no. The Ming treasure voyages are amazing in their own right, but they were never
so cool.
about colonization.
No.
The goal was to build giant ships and sail to known civilizations.
Yes.
So that everyone would acknowledge the superiority of Chinese pottery.
Yep.
This was a vanity project of the emperor, who, let's face it, had more resources than he knew what to do with.
Yeah, he wanted also to wanted Zheng He and the voyages to bring back exotic goods. A lot of them were animals. He ended up making this big zoo, which was kind of cool, or Yongle. And so that, they brought like giraffes back from Africa, which would, again, such a weird animal when you think about it, if you've never seen a giraffe before. They're also very intimidating because these ships also had gunpowder, they had firepower, and they'd roll up in this giant entourage and with tens of thousands of people, and it was really kind of an intimidating / impressive thing. That's what they wanted.
And like any enthusiastic hobbyist, once they die, I don't think their next of kin is going to continue dumping cash into their 40K collection. There was nothing the Americas, or the rest of the world for that matter, could offer the Chinese and the Confucian religion.
Let's remember that, because it's not about merchant activity, and these weren't even trade missions that they did there. They were just, hey, we're the Ming, we're in charge now, love us, or be intimidated by us, come back. It actually wanted to bring leaders back, and they would do the kowtow and have to bow in front of the emperor and stuff. But yeah, they were not about that. The China, resource wise, and this goes back to that industrialization topic, does not need anything. They don't need anything. China has everything they have in abundance.
Which, unlike Christianity, didn't put heavy emphasis on evangelizing others.
Yeah,
China really didn't care
about
others. The American West Coast is twice as far from Asia as the American East Coast is from Europe. And it has half the value of the East Coast.
Those ships sailed pretty close to the coast.
Instead of fertile lands and navigable rivers, you get mostly mountains, desert, tundra. All in all, even if the Ming had made it to America, they probably wouldn't have seen worth in it. Sadly, as cool of an idea as it is, to the Ming, it would only be a terrible idea. Actually, to the Ming, it wouldn't be an idea to begin with.
I mean, it would just be a thing. Again, we're just talking about a scenario. What if they if they were into colonization? Now, think of the Spanish motivations. They were trying to convert people to Christianity. They were hoping for gold. They were hoping for trade. Remember, they were trying to get to Asia, but even when they found out it wasn't really Asia, they still found value in it. But it's just the what if scenarios of what if the Chinese did find some kind of value in it, and they didn't. But it would be a pretty interesting scenario because instead of these conquistadors coming in and interacting with the Aztec or the Inca, you could have had the Chinese, and everything in the in the Western Hemisphere is some Chinese influence to it. All right, sunset invasion.
All right, so instead of China going east,
What is this one?
What if the Aztecs did? Like, they load up their jaguar warriors on big canoes and somehow sail to fight the Spanish.
No,
probably don't even need to explain why this scenario isn't the most realistic, but let's do it anyway.
They show up, get disease. Okay. They can't defeat the Spanish militarily because their military superiority is way bigger. They got steel, they got armors, they got horses, they got guns, all the stuff that, they did not have. The Aztec Empire didn't have. A more interesting one, I guess, or more plausible one is maybe they went and they don't get invaded, by the Spanish. They go down maybe to the Inca Empire, and then they go conquer that, and you have this like giant Western Hemispheric empire.
Let's say that first contact doesn't work out
Jaguar
for Cortez.
Knights.
He dies. But unlike that one video I did recently, this timeline goes even more off the rails.
I think I covered that
Imagine, if you will, the Aztecs invading Europe. Ignore the lack of seafaring tech needed to even reach Europe in the first place.
Yeah.
Somehow they make it. So what if they had? Well,
Nothing
the mindset societies like the Aztec or Inca even had regarding war was just completely different than that of the old world. Flower wars were...
Well, the Aztec engaged in a lot of warfare for tribute. They built their empire through tribute. They wanted to basically get control of these different regions, but for the purpose of getting tribute from them, getting their resources, to sacrificial victims. That was part of it too. But they liked tribute. That's what they did and how they grew their empire.
Were more about tribute and influence rather than direct control and subjugation.
Correct.
It wasn't really in the Aztec mindset.
But that's also not necessarily. That's also not necessarily because they didn't want to. We gotta also ask, could they? Did they actually have the power to do that?
To rule it. It wasn't really in the Aztec mindset to conquer this land to rule it. The main thing they would do is kidnap the losing soldiers and civilians for sacrifice.
Tribute's what you do, not necessarily when it's like you don't want to. You just don't find it economically feasible. Like the Chinese did this under the Tang Dynasty, later the Song Dynasty, where they didn't think it was profitable enough to, say, conquer Korea. They would rather just do the tribute. They did not think it was economically viable. And again, not even necessarily because they didn't want to. They would have liked it, but, it's hard.
Kind of a less efficient but more horrifying version of the Barbary pirates, I guess. Because unlike pirates, who have muskets and iron swords, the Aztecs still have, spears, obsidian spears, maybe a few captured muskets, but that's it. And they'd have to use that to try to conquer Spain. I almost feel like a buzzkill bringing this one up, because, it's just a neat little fictional idea.
It wouldn't even make it. The Spanish, Armada would just destroy all their boats.
Why am I bullying it? But no fun to be had in this video. We have to be entirely serious and say that Jaguar warriors couldn't possibly conquer early modern Europe. Hope you learned something.
Yeah, that's like a 0% chance. Trent Affair. The Confederates win. Okay, with the Trent Affair.
On face value, this scenario is pretty interesting. The POD being Prince Albert dying a little earlier than in our timeline. Queen Victoria never receives his advice to find a diplomatic solution to the Trent Affair. As a result, the Warhawks and the British ministry stoke the flames, seeing an opportunity to break the rising economic potential of the United States, leading to the UK siding with the Confederacy. But here's the thing. Regardless of what
they already kind of did though, because they loved the cheap products that were getting made out of the South.
Wanted, the voting members in Parliament were not keen on going to war with the states. Trade relations between the two countries were strong, and only getting stronger. The North was a huge importer of British manufactured goods, and exporter of raw goods fueling British factories. The idea that the British textile industry was dependent on southern cotton is kind of an overblown generalization.
Well, India.
Britain diversified its cotton industry in order to benefit from its vast colonial empire.
India was the biggest, historically the biggest cotton provider. And that's one of the reasons, among many economic reasons, why the British were so much more invested in India than they ever were the Americas.
Egypt and India could easily replace any losses as a result of the Union blockade. There was just too much good business between the two, across all levels of society. But enough about money. Would you really believe a scenario in which an increasingly anti-slavery Britain aligns itself with the slave-owning South after Lincoln's...
It wouldn't matter. They wouldn't give a crap about American slavery at that time. They don't care that the Americans have slaves. They wouldn't be showing up and be like, you guys gotta free your slaves. No way. The British are like, okay, but other people do because we want to buy their stuff. It wouldn't have been some moral mission they would have been on to eradicate slavery.
Emancipation Proclamation. Britain would have to slave-owning South after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Britain would have to fight a war that its population disagreed with over moral virtues. Only a decade later, the atrocities committed by the Ottomans against Bulgaria led to a huge public outcry. This tied Britain's hands.
That's all about balance of power. One thing Britain was very concerned about in Europe was balance of power. That's why you're going to get all these crazy alliances through the Balkan Wars and into World War I. You know, these other places, Ottoman Empire was really dragging its feet when it came to the industrialization that was happening in the rest of Europe. But they don't want to see that happen, especially as like with Russia as a threat.
To abandon their pro-Ottoman stance meant to keep Russia at bay. And we already know that Britain was very unhappy with the French intervention in Mexico. Keep in mind that a war with the Union wouldn't be a simple expedition. It would require a vast amount of manpower and resources. Canada would become vulnerable to an invasion, and the Northern Ironclads would offset the power of the Royal Navy. A good, realistic scenario where the Confederates still win is probably out there.
Are you guys down with the Ironclads? Like, do you really feel like in that form of them that they're really going to make that much of a difference? Okay, now, not saying that, okay, it would have led to like submarine warfare, which is going to be, a big deal in, 50 years, I guess you would say. But what do you guys think of the impact of Ironclads, like the Civil War era? All right, hold on. Italy joins the Central Powers. I mean, like they were supposed to, although it was a defensive treaty and not an offensive treaty. Italy joins. Okay, so if Italy joins, Ottoman Empire still joins, I guess we'll say in that. So there's kind of like 4 powers there. Would it have made much a difference? The Allies come in. I think Russia still probably has their issue. Where would Italy help more? Would it be to help prop up Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire? Would they help on the Western Front and like go up northwest? Let's see what he says.
Oh yeah, now we're in Kaiserreich territory.
Oh gosh.
There are many different ideas which ultimately lead to a German win in World War I. No American intervention, a successful spring offensive.
Just watch that video.
But Italy changing sides is probably the most common one I've seen. Like many of the scenarios on this list, this seems pretty plausible to the naked eye, but as anyone who understands the Great War will tell you, this one is bonkers. And no, Jimmy, but because Italy's siding with Austro-Hungary is not just an improbability, it's impossible.
Yeah, they hated each other. I mean, that's why they joined. Italy wanted all that territory, wanted Croatia. They wanted more regions around the Alps and stuff. So it's like, that wouldn't have happened. Remember, it was a defense treaty. So, okay, but hypothetically, they do get along.
There is an argument that the offer of Somalia, Djibouti, Nice, Savoy, and Tunisia were more appealing than the Entente's promises, and that's just hilarious. Italians considered the territory...
That's a lot more territory than they got.
Istria and South Tyrol as Italia Irredenta, or the unredeemed Italy. Unlike southern France, these territories had many Italian speakers. Additionally, the Treaty of London in 1915 pledged a ton of land in the Dalmatian coast and even Anatolia. Despite being in the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austro-Hungary, that was a purely defensive alliance, which wouldn't force the Italians to go up against a coalition with considerably more naval power. In 1914, the fragile Italian economy was dependent on American, French, and British imports.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems with Italy when it comes to this industrial era was the lack of coal. So Southern Europe did not have, so you'd count like Spain in that too. Basically, the Balkans and Eastern Europe did not have some of the most important things that you needed, specifically with iron and coal. That was completely necessary for industrialization. But again, Britain has the highest concentration of coal fields that of anywhere in Europe, and it's also very close to the surface, so it's easy to mine that way. United States has abundance of that. France has it too. So yeah, they're too economically dependent on the Allies. That's a good point that I didn't really think of going into this. Because if they didn't have that, I mean, Germany would have to completely prop up their economy. Austria-Hungary wouldn't be able to do anything for them.
Particularly coal. The South still relied on subsistence farming, and Italy also imported large amounts of food from France. By joining Germany, Italy would risk a total blockade of the boot. They would have to face a more powerful French army, suffer economic collapse, and essentially
Italy was
give
smart
up its
then, huh?
claim on what they considered rightful Italian lands.
In World War
all
I.
of which would be done so they could aid the aggressor, who offered them fewer rewards.
All right, Republicans win in Spain. No Franco. I don't know. What is it? What are they going to say? Like they join World War II now on the Allied side?
Oh goody, another Civil War scenario, but this time in the interwar period. It hasn't been too
Maybe
long
communism
since the last
takes over?
video, and I can't help but see the similarities in this scenario to the Russian Civil War. Yet again, we see an overconfident government split into many different factions,
There's so many
each with their own
competing ones.
interests. The Republicans were divided into moderates, socialists, anarchists, communists, and regionalists, while
Just
the
anti.
nationalists
It was
were
just like anti-fascist versus the fascists.
far more united. On top of that, the majority of officers sided with Franco, further hampering Republican leadership. Many see the Spanish War as a training exercise where foreign powers got to test out their toys.
Dress rehearsal.
And that is certainly true. But no matter how many
Like
volunteers
mini
and
blitzkrieg.
equipment you throw at the Republicans, or how much you nerf the German support, the Nationalists still come out on top. Germany's Condor Legion, 19,000 strong, was a crucial factor in the war. But even before their arrival, the Republicans are being slapped around all over the peninsula. In 1936, even after Germany absorbed Austria, Britain and France were
Anschluss.
petrified of a regional conflict, escalating into another world war. They and the US were committed to their non-intervention agreements, and also afraid of the spread of communism. So while it may be fun to
but the whole idea of like, socialists being there, it's kind of still part of the kind of this first Red Scare here. It poisoned the well. So it's like you have this big diverse group, but we know what poison the well means is like you get a little bit of poison right in it, and it then destroys, or at least you feel like it destroys everything it touches. And that's what, like the Americans would have thought at this time, because just a little touch of that socialism, they're not going to want to touch that.
Postulate a world where Hitler didn't support the nationalists, or Franco got shot. The reality is that the Republicans were their own worst enemy, and no divergence can fix
Wouldn't
that.
they just had a civil war? It's like, wouldn't have the Republicans, just after they defeated the fascists, wouldn't have then just been like a civil war? Because how would they agree on any kind of state building when you had such a vast amount of ideologies that were unified for the common enemy? And that was, pretty much it. Operation Downfall. So are we getting Mustache Man out?
So picture this. Oppenheimer either gets killed or never put in charge of the Manhattan Project. The US is forced to perform the biggest amphibious landing in human history. All in all, 760,000 Americans would descend upon the Japanese in this final bloody chapter of the war.
Invasion
There are
of
numerous
Japan.
scenarios revolving around World War II. In 1941, the Soviets and Japan signed a neutrality pact that was valid until 1946. But at Yalta, Stalin
They broke it. They
promised
broke it in 45 anyways, because they countered it with a treaty with the Americans to do D-Day. So Stalin then tells the Americans, "Hey, give us 3 months after Hitler's defeated. We'll help you with Japan."
Churchill and Roosevelt that valid until 1946. But at Yalta, Stalin promised
Plus, they
Churchill
did
and
fight each
Roosevelt
other.
that the Soviets would join the
At the
war in the
beginning.
East 3 months after Germany's surrender. And then on August 8th,
Which Soviets
7
did.
hours before Nagasaki, a bewildered Japan read that the Soviets broke the treaty and had just declared war. Talk about a bad day. By August 11th, South Sakhalin was occupied, and Japanese intelligence estimated that the Allied
It is interesting, though, that at that time, the Americans, thought they would need might need the the Russian help in that, and they go and join the war and end up doing D-Day and everything like that. But it's amazing that they make that deal, but then when it's actually time, like fast forward to 1945, and it's time to actually deal like some kind of final blow to Japan, the Americans don't really let the Russians help them. They go in and say no. Like, in fact, the ideology, and you get Truman now, is like, no, we actually don't want the Russians to be able to have any more territory. We don't want some kind of scenario where they're now going to be control of like fully in control of like a Manchuria and then potentially the islands of Japan. They were like, no, they didn't want them anyway. So it's like, what did the Americans get out of anything with those deals with the Soviet Union?
The invasion was only a few months away, which was right because downfall was scheduled for November 1st. People make these simulations in which 600,000 Japanese, all loyal to the Emperor and the Bushido Code, fight against the Americans for every island. But in reality, Japan was ready to give up. Like, it was
they had no power anymore.
The thing is, they were against the unconditional surrender of the Potsdam Declaration. The Supreme Council was already meeting and discussing the terms when they heard of Nagasaki, and they still didn't surrender after either bombing, despite
at least didn't surrender quick enough in the American perspective,
knowing that those were the only bombs America had. That Soviet invasion in Manchuria was just kind of the final nail in the coffin. Manchuria was Japan's breadbasket, and all of it was lost to the Soviets within 3 weeks.
That's why they invaded in the 30s.
They never anticipated that the Allies and commies would work together, and they were willing to stall for time, but this blitz melted that hope away. By the time November rolls around and the invasion is about to begin, that unconditional surrender would either be accepted or a slightly softer version of it would be negotiated to avoid hundreds of thousands of lost lives.
Like keep the Emperor
Yes, I did believe that misconception too.
Okay. All right, now we got Man in the High Castle. All right, let's see what happens.
Man, this scenario could honestly be a whole video. Look, Man in the High Castle was never meant to be a realistic alternate scenario. When it was first written, alternate history wasn't even really a thing. This was a trendsetter.
Nobody
this
hypothesized.
Was just another science fiction story by Philip K. Dick, a science fiction author. This is like overanalyzing Blade Runner as unrealistic. This map isn't meant to be accurate, but sometimes people on the internet still post about it.
I never did finish the TV series. I got through the first couple seasons, I think, maybe first couple seasons. So it started to get really slow, that series, but yeah. Anyway.
Like it is. Like, this is really what America would be like if World War II went a different way.
Yeah.
And that's where I draw the line.
There's way too many what ifs.
So, in the world of High Castle, Germany wins. America never recovered from the Great Depression
and if you didn't know, in that scenario, they do develop atomic bomb.
FDR was shot in the face, and they were economically too weak to wage a war against Germany. At the same time, Germany also created the atomic bomb first, nuking America's east coast and launching a joint invasion with the Japanese on the United States. By the time of this alternate 1960s, America is pretty much split down the middle between the two. Cool story premise, interesting dystopia, not an actual threat. This was never gonna happen. For one, Hitler never had any intention to make an atomic bomb. The Nazis deemed atomic fission as Jewish magic.
Sure, but would have liked the bomb, but just not Jews developing it. You know what I mean?
Of them.
He loved wonder weapons. He loved, like the idea of crazy wonder weapons, though.
Most renowned physicists at the time, like Einstein or Oppenheimer, were Jewish. A Hiroshima-style bombing to force an American surrender was never in the cards. And really, this was something that would always be held over Germany's head, whether they won the war on the ground or not. But this isn't about Germany winning World War II. Oh no, this is about this scenario, this map. And this map wouldn't happen because none of the Axis had plans to invade America. Attack America? Sure. Japanese raids on the West Coast, if somehow the American Navy just failed. Bioweapons, German U-boats terrorizing East Coast shipping. Yeah, sure, I guess.
Makes sense. But Germany being the one of the Axis powers that maybe would do it if they could.
Never any plans by any nation to land troops in America and actually conquer it. That wasn't even in their war aims.
Maybe a
Japan
forced
wanted
unification,
America to
though. I mean, that's kind of what ends up happening in Man in the High Castle. It pretty much just forces it. And then just the Americans become fascists and buy into the whole, like, just culturally buy into the whole scenario.
down so they could create their empire in Asia, and also kind of get revenge for cutting off their oil supply. And Germany wanted America to stop aiding Britain and the Soviets. The US really stopped both from achieving their conquests, but it was never a conquest itself. It's America. It's huge. Had the war gone differently, the US would have still remained untouched. It would be politically isolated, assuming the Axis even remain in power. But territorial.
But remember, that whole hypothesis is if they got nukes, because that changes everything. And if they were, obviously, the Germans were eager and willing to use it.
The same. North America is literally a fortress. It is an ocean away from all of its enemies. There is
may not have needed an invasion,
that
though.
Japan or Germany, even at their height, would have been able to land and successfully invade the United States. If you want to have a more realistic scenario that still has Man the High Castle elements, you could maybe imagine a world where the United States itself has a fascist revolution in response to the Axis victory. Like the old American government falls.
Exactly. That is way more likely to happen.
And the new one is ideologically allied to the Nazis, Henry Ford style. So there you have it. 10 scenarios. Did I spoil the fun? I sure did. But that's sometimes fun in itself. Thanks to all the Discord members who took part in the competition for this video. The 10 winners even got their own custom little guys.
Aww.
Look at them go. Once again, special thanks to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. Sign up using the link below and begin your family discovery journey today.
All right, final thoughts. All right, so out of the 10 of those, I mean, I think half of them are plausible, with the other half probably being implausible, or at least not having a massive effect on historical timelines as compared to the one that we're on right now. So, but it was fun to be able to go through a bunch of those, like the one with the Roman Empire industrializing, Ming Dynasty actually maybe colonizing, and then you saw the World War II scenarios. So those are fun just to be able to do it in kind of a rapid fire succession rather than maybe doing a 20-25 minute video, but instead doing a 5 to 10 minute segment. So I actually really like that. That was really cool. This was a lot of fun. It was a lot to talk about, and I had a lot of opinions on it. I want to hear what you guys think about those scenarios down there. Which ones do you think were actually dumb, and which ones do you think could have some plausibility to it? All right, with that, we'll see y'all next time. Bye.